Joining us now, Ambassador Ann Patterson. Ann Patterson, former ambassador to Pakistan and Egypt for the United States. She's also president of the U.S.-Qatar Council, and she most recently served as Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs 2013 to 2017 under John Kerry and President Barack Obama. Ambassador Patterson, couldn't wait to get you on. Thanks for making time for us.
No, thank you very much, John. This business of Syria and Turkey is a serious one, and I know the foreign policy establishment is endlessly talking about it.
So, Ambassador, you know what the president's decision is. He said that
Yes.
We're out. He said, I campaigned on it. I have to get out of these wars. I'm not going to be the cop for the area. I want out. And a lot of people going absolutely ballistic over his decision. Ambassador Patterson, what is your position?
So, John, I think this is a mistake. I think it's a mistake, and I want to say I agree with you. There's a lot of hysteria surrounding this issue, and I want to first say that the Kurds are not saints. I was just on the Syria working group, and there are a lot of certainly human rights violations by the Kurds in the Arabic-speaking parts of Syria. The Turks are, frankly, strategically important, and one of the true tragedies of the Syrian war has been the deterioration of our relationships with Turkey. But this is still a mistake. It's a mistake because the Kurds fought with us. They lost 11,000 people dead and injured. They really risked being overrun by the Turks. It's a mistake because they have in their detention centers 10,000 fighters, and maybe even more alarming, 70,000 women and children, which is a terrorist petri dish just waiting to spill over into the next generation, and with horrible humanitarian consequences. And frankly, the Kurds are going to have to turn to Assad to protect them. So this has all kinds of sort of implications. Now, I think you make a really valid point about how long should we stay there. And that's very difficult to say, but this is a small number of troops that has an enormous psychological and physical support for the Kurds. So I do think this is a mistake. I think it's a precipitous mistake, and I think, as he did before, he should walk it back as quickly as he can. I think that's going to be hard because the Turks seem to be preparing for an incursion into Syria.
What is Erdogan's objective?
Erdogan's objective is to stop the Kurds from being up against the Turkish border. He would say, and frankly American intelligence supports this, that this group of Kurds, the Syrian Democratic Forces, is really no different from the YPG, which is a terrorist group in Turkey, and the PKK, and frankly a terrorist group in the U.S. Now, American Special Forces would tell you, and Joe Votel wrote something about this. General Joe Votel, who just retired as the commander for the Central Command, that they have fought bravely and vigorously and are largely responsible for defeating ISIS, taking territory away from ISIS, and in the process saved many American lives. They did most of the fighting. Our losses in Syria have really been minimal. So he would say that they have been, and I think certainly this is true, that they have been vigorous and very supportive partners of the U.S. But Erdogan believes this is a terrorist group. He's been utterly consistent in this through two administrations. He also wants to push back, and this is going to be a huge problem. Many of the Syrian refugees who are now in Turkey, at the beginning of the war, Turkey took in 2 million Syrian refugees, treated them very well. He wants to get rid of them by sending them back into this so-called safe zone against the border. So it could be a very disastrous situation. The other factor, I think, John, is that basically other people in the region take a signal from this too, that we're not going to support our allies, that we're just going to sort of, cut and run, even though I'd be the first to say we've been there for quite a while. And they're going to take a signal for that too. And one of my main concerns about this whole mess in Syria with its humanitarian is the rise of Russia and the ability of the Russians to exercise influence in this part of the world where really they've been absent for many years.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Trucking the Truth Across America. We're with Ambassador Ann Patterson. She is the former United States ambassador to Egypt and Pakistan, served as Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs 2013 to 2017. She is a career U.S. Foreign Services diplomat, current president, U.S. Qatar Council in the Middle East. Ambassador Patterson, so one thing, Erdogan has got, or Turkey has 2 million Syrian refugees inside their border. They have treated them well. Erdogan wants to place them back in Syria, on paper to the layman. Doesn't sound like a bad idea. Why can't we do that without without some of without the Kurd leaders saying the other day, I guess last night, they called that plan ethnic cleansing. How do you respond to that?
Well, they could do that, and that frankly was part of the original plan that seems to, not original, it's been tried to negotiate for years, it seems to have fallen apart. Kurdish and American troops were going to patrol this border area jointly, and Turkey would have been able to send back some of these Syrian refugees under protection. I think what the Kurds are referring to, and I think, frankly, without the protection of U.S. troops, what we've seen in other places, when the Syrian refugees have come back, they've been, if not killed outright by Assad, they've been subject to very onerous conditions. A lot of the men have been taken away and disappeared, never seen again. So what we've seen so far is, as very isolated groups of refugees have gone back, it hasn't turned out well. I'm sure that's what the Kurds are referring to. But again, the real issue for me, the most urgent issue, is these camps. And the news coming out of, particularly in some respects, the civilian camp, where these female terrorists, let's not call them anything else because that's what they are, who've taken control of much of the camp. If these camps can't be patrolled and guarded and people are just let loose, there's an automatic resurgence of ISIS. And one hopes that the Kurds will continue to guard these camps because some of the Kurdish villages are in close proximity to them. But it's a real problem for the international community. 2,000 of these fighters are foreigners and countless women and children, and most countries won't take them back.
So how do the Kurds patrol the camps if they're under siege by the Turks?
Well, that's exactly the issue, John. They've said that they will not have the manpower to patrol the camps to protect these civilians, these women and children that were basically ISIS family members if they have to fight the Turks. So we'll see. That's again a huge worry because if these people are just let loose, most of the vast majority are not foreigners. They're Iraqis and Syrians. They'll just go to ground again. Remember that when ISIS lost its territory and it sort of converged in the last stand, this little place called Baghouz, there were vastly more people there than anyone had ever expected.
So we have 150 troops there right now. If you were advising President Trump, what would your advice be to him specifically, Ambassador Patterson, right now?
My advice would be to leave the troops there and continue the efforts because we basically help the Kurds control territory. And again, John, a lot of it is psychological and American presence. The idea that the Americans are there, I sometimes think Americans don't appreciate how still, with all our problems, we're so powerful overseas, and our mere presence has an enormous psychological impact. So I would recommend that he leave them there and continue to negotiate with the Turks on some kind of demilitarized zone, continue to negotiate with the UN process. This is a long, hard, and dreadfully difficult slog, but I just don't see that we have much choice but to keep those troops there.
Ambassador Patterson, apparently the president has jawboned Erdogan into not doing this for 2 years, right? What changed? I'm
not entirely sure about that. There have been endless negotiations with the Turks. I thought Ambassador Jim Jeffrey had reached a deal with the Turks to do this joint patrol, because the Kurds argue that not only are the Turks going to invade Syria, but they've taken down their defenses because they thought they were going to have joint patrols with the Americans. So I'm not entirely sure what changed with the president. Again, I don't fault the president for wanting better relations with Turkey. I think that's absolutely essential for our overall strategic posture. But I don't know what changed. He said, I think, in one of his tweets or maybe a White House statement, that he's just pretty much had it with these endless wars and it's time to go home. So maybe that was it.
Ambassador Patterson, Turkey's an ally of ours. They're part of NATO. The president has gotten an immense amount of criticism from the international community for so-called not treating our allies nicely, asking them to pony up for NATO, asking them to pony up for the Ukrainians, putting tariffs on the European Union because he thought we were getting screwed, putting tariffs on Germany because they're sending over Mercedes and Volkswagens and BMWs with a 5% tariff where we have a 25% tariff. So he gets all kinds of criticism from the international community, and that, look, whether it's Canada, the UK, these are allies, give him a pass. Well, why isn't the same thing said about Erdogan? I mean, they're a member of NATO, and they have the second largest army in NATO, and they've contributed their fair share, unlike some of our European counterparts. So, how do you navigate your way through that?
Well, I think that's hard, and here's where I diverge from, frankly, a lot of my colleagues. I think the Turkey relationship is hugely important, and people talk a lot, and this is absolutely true, about Erdogan being an autocrat and very repressive and serious crackdowns on journalists. Yes, that's all true. But compared to what? And we do business, we have to do business all over the world. I mean, look at the Gulf with leaders that aren't exactly, Jeffersonian Democrats.
Like Mohammed bin Salman.
Like Mohammed bin Salman, so I think Turkey is held to a more European standard in some respects than, for instance, with Mohammed bin Salman. So we have to do business with these people. I think one of the things that happened with Turkey, and I saw this early on in the Obama administration, everyone looked to Turkey as sort of this ideal Islamic state, what the future of Islamic state, a Muslim state could be like, and it didn't turn out like that. So, but it's an absolutely essential relationship, but this is still a mistake. If they go into Syria, if they attack the Kurds, if they kill the Kurds in droves, that's a signal that the United States just can't afford to give, that we don't stand by people that have stood by us. But one thing that struck me is when I left government and then I worked on this Syria study group, one of my biggest takeaways was how our relationship with Turkey had deteriorated in the past 2 years.
So the president trying to revitalize that, right, by allowing Erdogan to go forward with his, you could call it resettlement plans, offensive, militarily, whatever you want to call it. So it seems like the president is in alignment with your view that we have to repair a relationship with Turkey, make it better. And so he's given Erdogan this leeway, but yet he's coming under intense criticism for that.
Yeah, John, but I don't think this is a way to restore the relationship with Turkey because the other costs were too high. I mean, he came out later, and this is where I think he's probably on the right track. He came out later and said, Turkey's a huge trading partner. Let's see if we can do something in that respect. But I don't think throwing the Kurds under the bus are the answer to relations with improving relations with Turkey. There are other ways to do that, and you know we've cracked down on Turkey, I think correctly, because they brought the Russian air defense system. We took away the Joint Strike Fighter. They were a co-producer, and I think had bought or planned to buy 100 planes. So there have been huge ups and downs in this relationship with Turkey, and they need to do everything they can to repair it, but this is not the way to do it.
Ambassador Patterson, what assurances do you think that Erdogan made to the president in their conversation? Obviously, if there is a slaughter of the Kurds, as many people in the defense and international community in the U.S. are saying is going to happen, obviously that's going to be all over the news. It's not going to be good for Erdogan. You look at how Erdogan has managed the international press. I mean, you have to agree with me that it's been masterful. I mean, the guy's communications directors and the way he's basically had international press eating out of his hand during the Khashoggi situation is basically should be written in an MBA class at Harvard. It was so brilliantly done. I can't imagine that Erdogan is going to give that away by having some slaughter here of the Kurds. So what assurances do you think he made to Trump?
I don't know. I don't know what assurances he made, but he's got his own domestic issues too, and this YPG, PKK, SDF issue is a huge domestic issue inside of Turkey. So I agree with you. There was probably more to the conversation than we know, but the domestic criticism the president is taking on this too from Republicans like Lindsey Graham and particularly on Lindsey Graham who's used to visit my posts and is not only a big supporter but also very knowledgeable on foreign affairs. People are desperately afraid that these Kurds who have fought bravely beside us are just going to either jump into Assad's hands, which probably they're already discussing that, or are just going to be slaughtered. And in the process, all these terrorists and terrorist dependents and women and children will be released into the general population.
But hasn't the president on Twitter and other platforms told Erdogan that he's got to be very careful here, that if there is, if he gets a whiff of any kind of a slaughter, that he's going to react to it? So it almost seems to me like Erdogan got what he wanted. He got the U.S. out. Why would he jeopardize that? Well, because I think Turks see the Kurds as a threat, and you know, I don't know what he said to the president, but they see, and this has of course been an issue in the Obama administration. They saw our arming the Kurds and fighting with the Kurds as a threat to Turkey, and we really didn't have any choice as the U.S. because there was certainly, as General Votel said, there was no appetite for putting a lot of Americans on the ground there, but we needed to defeat ISIS, which was going to had metastasized all over the region, and the Kurds were the ones that took ISIS territory away from this awful terrorist group. So
it's always been a huge point of pressure with the Turks and the Kurds, and that we've tried to manage that. But we'll see. I mean, it looks like the Turks are planning to make an incursion in the next few days.
All right. Well, we're going to have you back next week to see what plays out. Ambassador Ann Patterson, former U.S. Ambassador to Egypt and Pakistan, and now President, U.S. Qatar Council. Ambassador, always good to have you on. Great insight. I thank you, and so do our listeners for that, Ambassador Patterson. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.
John.